And Sabrina, we've learned a lot in recent months about just how far Trump went to try to overturn the election, try to subvert democracy. To tell the acting attorney general to, quote, just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressmen, presumably the types like Jim Jordan and the rest. I mean, it's still stunning. I have not lost my capacity to be shocked.
Right. It may not be surprising, but it is still stunning because, as you point out, we have seen evidence of the former president's attempts to exert pressure on state and local officials, on members of Congress, on his own vice president, Mike Pence. And then now you have these really striking conversations that we're hearing about with top leaders at the Justice Department. And, you know, it does reinforce just the lengths to which he was willing to go to subvert the will of the American people and overturn the outcome of the election. But it's not just really about what happened in the past, because he still really is the de facto leader of the Republican Party. 100%. And a lot of these Republicans, even those who have condemned his rhetoric on January 6th and his efforts to overturn the election, many Republicans in Congress would still gladly take his endorsement. And he is still mounting this campaign, using his platform to try and spread the false notion, the lie that the election was stolen. So there are very real-time implications for this entire story, and it's certainly not the end of it. And
think about this. Just leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. What if the Republican congressman had controlled Congress? What if he was leaving it up to Jim Jordan, who was a chairman, Kevin McCarthy, who was the speaker? I mean, that is what people are afraid about. That's what the Liz Cheneys of the world are warning us all about.
Well, and that's part of what this investigation will look into, is not just what happened in January 6th. They could potentially bring some of these people before them. We could hear more about this. But already, Jake, what we know from just reading those notes is it painted a picture of a president who was desperate to win, who was desperate to cling on to power, who was looking for any possible opportunity to say the election was stolen from him, even as Department of Justice officials were telling him that they looked into all these instances, they were doing their job. But another thing we did learn is that the Department of Justice was telling him that behind closed doors, and that they were independent, and that the agency was working the way that it should with that independence.
And this is an important point, because the notes also show that both men pushed back against Trump, telling him, quote, we are doing our job. Much of the information you're getting is false. But Bill, what if somebody else had been in that job, right? I mean, right now there is a big effort. Again, this is about the future, not just the past. There's a big effort to take some of these people who were guardrails. Governor Kemp in Georgia, whatever you think of him, he was a guardrail. Secretary of State Raffensperger in Georgia. There is an effort to replace them with sycophants who will do what Trump wants.
Right, and it came closer than we realized. Who was the conversation was December 27th, I believe. It was with Acting Attorney General Rosen. Why was he Acting Attorney General? Because Bill Barr had quit or been fired 10 days before, because Bill Barr, who was not a shrinking violet in terms of helping Donald Trump and pushing the edge of the envelope in terms of using the Justice Department in a pretty White House-friendly way, knew he couldn't stay because of what he was about to be asked to do. Rosen almost gets fired and replaced by another lower-level Assistant Attorney General who Trump thought would do his bidding. Mark Esper, the defense secretary, had been fired the week after the election. So the degree to which the key, think of this as a foreign country, the defense secretary is fired, a bunch of cronies put in there, attorney general fired or quit, someone's put in there. It's lucky that even though Esper was gone, Mark Milley held the line at defense. It's lucky that Acting Attorney General Rosen seems to have held the line at justice. But the degree to which this was a genuine attempt at usurpation of power by a sitting president is just something we can't forget. And then it does make it amazing that he's still the leader of the Republican Party and is going about purging the people at the state level who also checked his usurpation, the Secretary of State of Georgia, officials in Michigan, and others.
Yeah, I mean, but the guardrails held this time.
Right.
This time.
Mm-hmm. And that's what's terrifying to me. If this was any other country, as you intimated, like, we would launch an investigation. We would be talking about what's happening overseas, but it happened here. And I think sometimes people are comforted that the guardrails held, and so like, well, let's move on. Let's talk about something else now. But we can't do that, because the only way that we can guarantee that this doesn't happen again is that there are actual consequences for the President of the United States and for members of the major party, the Republican Party, trying to overturn an election. There has to be consequences to these actions.
You know, it's so strange, though. we've all been talking about this now for months, and Liz Cheney basically sacrificing her political career for this, Adam Kinzinger, et cetera. I have heard no Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy, Donald Trump, anyone, say, oh, we would never try to steal an election. We're not trying to change the rules so that next time we can get away with it. That's nonsense. I've never heard anybody push back on this.
Well, they are saying that they are trying to change the rules so that next time they can try and prevent what they're saying was the voting fraud, which is, as we've discussed at length,
non-existent,
unsubstantiated.
Right.
However, but they are. This goes into the issue of voting rights legislation, which I know we could have a whole other roundtable on, but that is what is happening in some of these states and what Democrats on Capitol Hill are trying to push through federal legislation to stop from happening.
Yeah.
And I was going to say that's where the cognitive dissonance is, because even some of the Republicans who acted as guardrails, even some of them are using, these claims, false claims about election fraud as the basis through which they are going to now advance or already are advancing legislation to crack down on ballot access. And so that effort really extends beyond just the Trump loyalists and to a lot of the Republican establishment. But you mentioned Liz Cheney. The reality is that this is not the party of Liz Cheney. It's the party of Donald Trump. And so I think that is really the fight that you're going to continue to see play out within the Republican Party in the coming months.
These notes came from the Oversight Committee in the House. It's chaired by Carolyn Maloney of New York. She said in a statement, Bill, the committee has begun scheduling interviews with key witnesses to investigate the full extent of the former president's corruption, and I will exercise every tool at my disposal to ensure all witness testimony is secured without delay. But what is the end game here? They can't impeach him. I don't know that any of this rises to the level of criminal. What's the end game? Just bringing it to the attention of the American people?
Yeah, and I think, as you said, really, it should disqualify Trump as a potential candidate for the presidency.
Well, add it to the list
next time. Well, but this is pretty fundamental. I mean, if he gets elected, he is going to put in more pliant people at justice and at defense. If they can't get confirmed, he'll put them in on some acting basis. He'll fire the chiefs of staff and get military people from the ranks who he thinks will. I mean, you are really looking at a fundamental crisis. And the idea that one of our two major parties hasn't just said, they don't have to go as far as I go and all this, but they haven't said thank you, former President Trump.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Think of Richard Nixon, who did less than Trump, much less in terms of his fundamental usurpation of power, in my opinion. I mean, people weren't impolite to Nixon necessarily, but no one thought, hey, let's have Richard Nixon come back in 1980 and be the candidate. And that's really what we're looking at.
I want to ask you